All right, let's jump right into one of the most foundational stories of humanity's origins. We're going to explore its major turning points, looking at how this single narrative really shapes everything that comes after. It's a story of two brothers whose choices end up setting all of humanity on two very, very different paths.
So let me ask you, what was the world's very first crime? Now you'd probably say murder, right? And you'd be so close. But the story actually begins with a different choice, an earlier one, a single act that kicks off this whole tragic domino effect. You see, to really understand the first murder, we have to go back to the first sin.
So let's set the scene. We're starting in the Garden of Eden. Picture a perfect world, where the very first domino in this epic story is just about to get tipped over.
You know, it all starts with just one rule, a simple one really. There's this one tree, just one, in the entire garden that's completely off limits. But then, of course, a challenger shows up, the serpent, and he goes right after that one rule, questioning it, twisting it. He tells Eve, "You shall not surely die." The text says that when Eve saw the fruit was desirable to make one wise, she took it and she ate. And then she gave some to Adam, who was right there with her. And just like that, they made a choice that was going to change everything.
Now here's what's so interesting. The immediate effect. The serpent was in a way kind of right. They didn't just drop dead on the spot. No, something else happened. Their eyes were opened, and the very first things they felt were shame and fear. Think about that. For the first time ever, they actually hid from God. In that one moment, the innocence of the garden was completely shattered.
Well, the consequences come down hard and fast, laid out in three distinct curses. First, the serpent is humbled, cursed to crawl on its belly. Second, the woman will now face sorrow and pain in childbirth. And for Adam, the very ground he was meant to care for is now cursed. From now on, survival is going to mean struggle, sweat, and sorrow. And that's it. Paradise is lost. They're driven out of the garden, and there is no going back. And in this final, kind of tragic twist of irony, Adam is sent out to work the exact same ground that was just cursed because of what he did. So this cursed ground, this now becomes the stage for the next generation's drama.
Okay, so let's move forward to that next generation. Let's see how this new harsh reality outside the garden starts to shape the lives of the very first two brothers, Cain and Abel.
So here they are, the two sons. You've got Cain, a farmer tilling that cursed ground we just talked about, and you have Abel, a keeper of sheep. Now they both bring an offering to God. Cain brings some of the fruit from the soil. Abel, on the other hand, brings the very best of his flock, the firstlings. And the text is really clear. God had respect for Abel and his offering, but for Cain's he did not. And that rejection, it just ignites a furious rage in Cain.
And this is such a critical moment. God speaks directly to Cain, who is just seething with anger. And he warns him, basically saying, look, you have a choice. Sin is crouching at your door like a predator, and it desires to have you, but you must rule over it. I mean, it's an incredibly clear warning, a direct call for self-control.
But Cain, he doesn't rule over it. He lets the sin right in. When they're alone out in the field, all that jealousy and anger just boils over, and he murders his brother. The world's first crime isn't just an act of violence, it's a direct rejection of God's warning. The very first human born on earth becomes the first murderer. Just let that sink in.
So, what happens next? Now we get into the immediate fallout of this terrible crime. The confrontation, the denial, and the punishment that follows are going to define the entire rest of Cain's life.
Now this is a crucial point. Cain's curse is a direct escalation of his father's. Remember, Adam's punishment was to work the cursed ground with difficulty. Well, Cain is now cursed from that very ground. It won't sustain him anymore. The earth itself becomes his enemy, sentencing him to a life of rootless wandering. So Cain cries out that his punishment is just too much, that anyone who finds him is going to kill him. And in a really surprising turn, God shows him a kind of, well, a severe mercy. He places a mark on Cain. And this is often misunderstood. It's not a mark of shame. It's actually a sign of divine protection, warning others not to take vengeance on him.
So, after Cain is exiled to wander the earth, the story of humanity really splits. From this point on, we're going to trace two distinct family trees, two very different destinies that both spring from this one first family.
See, Adam and Eve have another son, Seth, who is seen as a replacement for the righteous Abel that they lost. And then, when Seth has his own son, Enos, something new and different happens. People begin to actively call upon God. This marks the beginning of a new and much more hopeful lineage.
And this just illustrates the divergence so brilliantly. On one hand, you have Cain's descendants. They're builders, they're innovators, they build the first city, they invent musical instruments, they figure out metalworking. They're creating civilization. But they also escalate in violence. By contrast, Seth's descendants are defined by their relationship with God, their incredible longevity, and their faith.
And if you want to see just how far Cain's line has fallen, just listen to this chilling boast from his descendant, Lamech. He's bragging to his wives about killing a man for merely wounding him. And then he twists God's protective promise to Cain into his own personal declaration of wildly disproportionate revenge. It's just a terrifying portrait of unchecked pride and violence.
All right, let's turn away from that path of violence and focus back on the hopeful line of Seth. This is a lineage that culminates in a figure who represents comfort and maybe even a reset for humanity.
Within Seth's family tree, there's this truly remarkable man named Enoch. His relationship with God was so close, so intimate, that the text simply says he walked with God. And then, one day, he was just gone, because God took him. He doesn't die, he transcends. It's like the ultimate sign of blessing on this family line.
And then there's Enoch's son, Methuselah, and he lives to be 969 years old, the longest human lifespan recorded in the entire text. This incredible age just stands in such stark contrast to the violent, shortened lives that are hinted at in Lamech's boast. It really symbolizes a lineage blessed with life and endurance.
And finally, the line of Seth leads us to Noah. At his birth, his father Lamech, a very different man than the Lamech from Cain's line, gives him a prophetic name. He says, "This child will bring comfort from the toil of working the ground which the Lord hath cursed." And just like that, it brings the entire narrative full circle, right back to the original curse from Eden, and it promises a new beginning.
So we're left with these two primal paths for humanity. You've got the way of Cain, building, creating, striving for earthly glory, but it's always shadowed by violence and pride. And then you have the way of Seth, walking with God, enduring, and seeking comfort in a broken world. The question this ancient story leaves us with is actually a pretty modern one. Do we still see these two patterns playing out in our world, in our societies, and maybe even within ourselves today?